War Kept Peace, a short story by yours truly. Homer stood in solace as what he had internally thought was expressing itself now before him. Had he thought the truth and then observed it? Or was the truth present and had influenced his thought? The wonder came about after he had walked home from work one day, as he usually did, but this time was different. He was usually enveloped in the world around him, somehow taking away his ability to critically observe it. But in this moment, it was as if he wasn't a part of it and had been granted the ability to look at it. Stepping out of the painting, he could see it more clearly. The moment spoke to him, not only about what was in this moment, but what surrounded the moment, past to this present, and from this present to presents to come. Why had he somehow stumbled upon this plane here, somehow on another level? Could he ever regress back to where he was before? And if he did, would he even be aware of where he was now, forgetting himself it seemed? The thought scared him. He almost identified with this moment now, an integral part of him, and if he were to lose it, it would be as if he was saying goodbye to a part of himself, changing dramatically, like he was dying. He shivered, and the feeling caused him to focus elsewhere, not so observant upon his own being. There were multitudes of people around him, a thing which he had never really been aware of. None of them seemed to be in the state he was. They all seemed to be under influence of the world, caught in its entrancing spell, like they were one mass, just moving with the turning of it all. Himself now, something which didn't react merely to the many stimuli prompting reaction, almost as if he didn't fit in anymore, not a part of it. He wondered if he was going to be shuttled off, no longer a part of the club, without his membership of being observantly unobservant. He felt dizzy and couldn't focus. The rush and overwhelming sense of everything going on, not only around him, but beyond his perspective as well, came knocking on his door. Were any of them unique? Did any of them think? Rationale told him yes, but it was almost like they were being thought for somehow. He knew each of them were unique, but they all acted as one. He felt the need to hide at this moment before he was discovered, and took a route not normally on his pathway home from work. As he sat on the train, something he did on occasion, but was usually enveloped in some form of stimulus that kept his mind from going off track. Like the paper or the television positioned on the overhead, he wondered at this moment, all these things presenting themselves to him, through these things were controlled forms of information, approved to be distributed to the masses. He thought, what if there was information, not necessarily just whimsical thoughts, but practical forms of thinking, merely not fitting for the mass communication he was so often seemingly hypnotized by. His book had just become published, and he now had a class with which he led that provided him enough income to sustain his life comfortably. It had been years since that moment he decided not to go back to his former job, to think for himself, which he compared to somehow blazing a trail through the wilderness. The approved methods of thinking were the common roads in which everyone else used, and were considered safe. Being in the wilderness, you never knew what kind of wild animals you were going to come across, and he had certainly escaped a few of them, which would have gotten himself into trouble, leading down eventually into a path of imprisonment, he supposed, rather than the freedom he now felt. The class he led was a public one, which he had started up by posting ads for in the local paper, ironically something that at one recent point in time he was blatantly in opposition of, for the sense of control and propagandized misinformation he believed it held. However, he reconciled that if people wanted to come and explore the mountain he was on, it served good purpose that there be a main road by which people could easily travel to where he was now, thinking then that people could choose to do on the road what they pleased, almost in a sense that there was even a wilderness in the popular form of thinking, a multitude of paths that led to differing outcomes. The same as where it was he found himself now. It was odd. The roads were built by the people, going where the whole wanted, but no one was this whole. meaning that it wasn't truly for any of them individually, but for something beyond any of them, the higher them. The class met and spoke on many things. Nothing was off topic, but certain schools of thought were definitely advocated, and he gave warnings of places he had been in which others shouldn't go. But in doing so, it made him feel as though he was now what he once despised. So he would always wish anyone the best of luck whenever they went against his wishes, furthering no more opposition in their path than the initial tidbit. It was fairly small, and everybody was there for wanting rather than requirement, which meant that they were all fairly interactive, at least the regulars. He figured themselves to almost be their own political party, talking everything from politics to business investments, and the metaphoric and existential meaning behind it all, even at times practicing certain physical activities to somehow strain themselves into new experience, giving them different perspectives on places they've already been. It was enough to keep him going, but he hoped that his book would be a success, one which would allow him to elevate the experience of his life, which he thought all life was, the yearning for experience, one that the class had discussed extensively, taking on an almost selfish tone to the approach, but they reasoned that a properly motivated selfish man would in fact improve things for everyone, as the man would want to improve his own environment by selfish desire, which would in turn improve this environment for all those who found themselves within the environments the man sought to improve. Today's discussion had no central theme, as most of them did not, but would focus in on whatever seemed pressing at the moment, either on the world or individually for the attendees. Sometimes, however, practicing discussions on things seemingly out of place, on purpose, ritualistically practicing formulas already known, as a way in which to centralize their minds, when it felt as if they were getting too spread out in regards to theory. With the release of his book, it was obviously a note worthy of mentioning, as many of his peers, which he preferred to refer to them as, even though some still insisted they were his disciples and students, had purchased. The book was titled War Kept Peace, and was a title that at times were narrations of fictional characters who were going through experiences in relation to the overall motive of the piece. He thought it added a sense of identity to the work, and the book could almost be passed as something of novelty fiction for which he wouldn't be criticized by those who felt themselves credited professionals on the topics at hand. Instead of himself being the narrator, linking the ideas expressly to be of his own, the made-up characters in the novel would have expression for which he could apply idealizations through, feeling then he could reach more while being criticized less.